Most people talk about building companies in terms of success, funding rounds, growth, and these big outcomes. The reality is, most companies get pretty close to breaking at some point. Can you take me back to a moment in your career when you genuinely thought things might not work out?
Probably the ones that are most vivid for me when Russia invaded Ukraine. We had 80% of our development team in Ukraine, in Kyiv mostly. And when that happened, all hell broke loose. Some of our employees were trying to leave the country. They were being stopped at the border. We had these kind of existential questions about, are we going to be able to support the product? How are we going to continue building the company when we're losing so much of our institutional knowledge? My first principle was to always just think about what's best for our team first. I remember saying this to many people in the company: your priorities are family, country, and then company.
Howard, most people talk about building companies in terms of success, funding rounds, growth, and these big outcomes. The reality is, most companies get pretty close to breaking at some point. And what's far less talked about is what it actually feels like for a CEO when things aren't working, when the pressure builds, and when the decisions that start to carry real consequences, not just for the business, but for your life. And I know this is going to be, I guess, a little bit personal, but I really wanted to start there. So can you take me back to a moment in your career when you genuinely thought things might not work out?
Ferris, thanks for having me. And this is such a great place to start because I feel like building companies, it's a rite of passage to go through struggle. And it's actually what makes the journey so enjoyable, to know that you went through hard times and were able to overcome them with your team. I can think of so many, but probably the ones that are most vivid for me right now are from my prior company, Cyberhaven, where I was the CEO for 5 years. I started at Cyberhaven in June of 2020, so still in the early days of COVID. And I left sometime in the spring of last year, so I was there about 5 years. I can tell you, we had so many dark times. Probably the one that is most public is when Russia invaded Ukraine. At the time that Russia invaded Ukraine, we had 80% of our development team in Ukraine, in Kyiv mostly. I was actually personally in Kyiv visiting my team 2 months before Russia invaded, and it was so wild because I vividly recall being there, traveling, talking with the team, talking with locals, people that were serving us in restaurants, just their thoughts about Russia, and because there was already a little bit of tension building and some speculation that there would be an invasion. And when that happened, all hell broke loose. You imagine some of our employees, many of them were trying to leave the country. They were being stopped at the border. We had these kind of existential questions about, are we going to be able to support the product if bugs and issues are being reported? How are we going to continue building the company when we're losing so much of our institutional knowledge if that team were to be cut off? What should we do for them financially, given that many of them were going to be under financial pressure? And of course, as a young startup, we weren't an AI native company raising hundreds of millions of dollars with just an idea like you see happening these days. So we were somewhat funding constrained. So there were a lot of very, very difficult questions in that time and a pretty dark moment for the company. And we worked through it. Obviously, company did well. We kept going. But that was a pretty dark moment when that happened because I thought that was the end of the company, just given how much dependency we had there.
That must be incredible times in the way that I guess as a CEO, you've got such a huge burden. As you said, 8% of your team's out there. How are you able to compartmentalize that and make the right decisions?
I can break this down in so many ways. If I just look at people, strategy, and then execution, let's just break it down in those three. I think there was very little strategy change because we were already a pretty small, lean team, and we weren't going to go dramatically scope down our vision for the product because we were already kind of going with a fairly focused product strategy. So we weren't going to change the product strategy much or the go-to-market strategy. So I think on strategy, there was very little impact. People was probably where we had the most impact. And then of course on execution. So on people, my first principle was to always just think about what's best for our team first. And I remember saying this to many people in the company, especially for the people in Ukraine at the time: your priorities are family, country, and then company. That's what your priorities should be. I always try to make sure that we took care of the people first and not just try to put the company's interest ahead of what was best for them. That manifested in so many different ways. For example, when we thought about people that were being drafted, because if you follow the stories closely, because there was such a shortage of able, age, fighting, combat ready citizens, they started drafting and extending the draft. They would grab people off the street to put them into the armed forces. And we had that happen with a few of our engineers, literally like just grabbed off the street and conscripted into service. We had to think about like, what would we do for them? What would we do for their jobs to keep their jobs? What would we do for their pay? Like, do we continue paying them during this time? And in all of those decisions, I always operate with the first principles of we got to think about what's best for these people first, not just as employees, but people. And so I think that was one part of it. Another part of it is we try to help people get out of the country. Many people wanted to relocate. Many of our employees actually, it was interesting. We had one couple that were employed. The husband joined first and then the wife joined later. The women were all allowed to leave. So in this one family that were both employees, wife and their child, they were able to leave the country. They moved to Germany. But the husband, who was the more seasoned, tenured engineer that was probably more critical for us, he was kept in the country and he had to like basically survive and continue to work for many, many months. I think he was alone continuing to work for us for like 9 months before he saw his family. So there was just an incredible amount of like suffering that happened with the people at the time. And I remember that holiday season, my wife and I, we went and bought gifts for all the children that were impacted with this, where they were separated from their families. We figured out who they were. We figured out what age they were, what toys they might like. But I'll tell you, the hardest thing that my wife and I had was we had a hard time shipping the products there. We couldn't like figure out a way to deliver these gifts. And so we try to do a lot for the families and the people that were impacted in every single way, financially, supporting them in relocation and trying to get out of the country. We even looked at like some covert operations, like basically like looking at ways that we can bribe folks that worked at the border to allow some of our employees out. We looked at options like that. We looked at loopholes of if you had a student visa, you could leave the country. There were all kinds of things that we were looking into to help our team out. And that just gives you a sense of like what we try to do for the people. And then on execution, we very quickly went into a mode of like, okay, are we fault tolerant here? Do we have people in other geographies that were not impacted by the invasion, by the war, that could pick up and handle delivery of certain features or troubleshooting and bug fixing, et cetera? So we quickly got ourselves to some sort of like fault tolerant mode, where if the whole team in Ukraine was cut off, we still could operate as a company. So that was like probably the first order of business. And then the second order was like to try to figure out, how it would impact our velocity. Because as a young company, you have to ship fast, you have to keep delivering fast. There was definitely going to be some impact. So we had to then start to really focus even more narrowly, like, okay, what do we really need to get done this quarter? What can be pushed out? So we had to get ruthless in prioritizing our roadmap. That was a big one. And then the final one is around communications. How do we communicate our dependency on Ukraine to our customers? Many of them knew that we had a lot of engineers there, they worked with them, et cetera. So we had to make sure that the customers felt safe and comfortable that they could continue to rely on us for something that was very critical for their operation. And so we had to do a lot on communications to be transparent, but also to reassure our customers that they could continue to trust us and work with us.
Very stressful period. It makes you think, as a CEO of a company, your responsibilities are not just to family and home. You have responsibility to a company and the team, and maybe that even it does extend to your employees' family, husbands, their wives, their kids. Very scary times. When you think about that period of time and how you went through it, was naturally very unexpected. Taking on the job of the CEO to run a company, and all of a sudden these things happen. What were those moments for you personally? Like when you're at home, the sleepless nights, I guess, the mornings, how did you think about the responsibilities you have to your team, to your employees, to your family, to investors? What was that like for you?
It weighed on me a lot because at the time my kids were very young. I have twins who were 2 at the time, and I had a 4-year-old. It was like emotionally very heavy to think about like that family that I mentioned that got split up. His son actually is the same age as my son. They both love trains. So I still remember when I was in Kyiv 2 months before the invasion, this gentleman, his name's Ivan. Ivan was like guiding me on where to get trains that were from Kyiv so I could bring back as a toy to my son. And it was heartbreaking to think like what would happen if I were separated from my son at that age, a 2-year-old, for 9 months, and still having to carry on because he continued to work because he wanted to make sure he could provide for his family. But again, he adopted that kind of nationalist, patriotic mindset that I got to be here to support Ukraine, because if I can make income, that brings money into Ukraine, that allows more people to believe that Ukraine is still investable and still a place where they want to build teams and hire. So he saw it as a duty, not just to the company, but to his family and to his country to continue to work and push ahead. But it was heartbreaking. It was weighing on me because just thinking about his situation, like if I were in those shoes, what would that do to me emotionally? So it was weighing on me a lot. I think in terms of like the decision making, right? The discernment of what's the right thing to do. I just went back to my first principles. I talked to a lot of people. Obviously, we weren't the only company impacted with this. In my VC portfolio, there were several companies that had a big operation in Ukraine. I talked to all those CEOs to try to figure out what they were doing, understand sort of like what's the benchmark here for how to take care of the team. I think we always try to go above that. Whatever I heard from my peers, I would always try to do more for our team. Like, for example, someone would tell me, oh yeah, we've decided that we're gonna, pay them for a certain period of time, like 2 months or 3 months. Well, I would take that and say, okay, that seems like the right thing to do, but maybe we should just prepay it. We should just like give the money in advance because they need it now. They need it urgently to support not just themselves, but their extended family. There were a lot of things like that going on. So I tried to like talk to a lot of people, but I always went back to my first principles of like, okay, take care of this person, make sure they can provide for their families, and don't worry about the productivity and the work. Because I think it's very easy to fall into that trap of looking at, okay, this developer, because of the war in Ukraine, their productivity is kind of cut in half. Does this mean like we should go replace this person? And in every one of those decisions, I always push back and said, we should be patient. We should let this play out. We should understand what they're going through, and we should figure out how to make up for that work that's not getting done.
These are very hard and extreme times, and naturally the impact on the company is huge. When you think of your career and all the executive positions you've been in, outside of this particular scenario, which is one that is heartbreaking and extreme, that as a CEO you have to deal with being at Cyberhaven at the time, when you think about the successes and failures of companies, what do you think are the main reasons companies fail? Is it the people? Is it the product? Is it the market? Is it execution? Is it funding? Especially in the startup ecosystem.
It's all of those things is a short answer. I think the one that is probably universal for me, it's the people. And I think the failure mode on people come in a couple different flavors. One is hiring the wrong people at the wrong stage. We hear about that all the time, right? Stage fit or stage appropriateness. I'm sure you hear that all the time as you talk to people. You're in the recruiting business, so you know that. The second failure mode that I see is wrong motivation. Like, for example, I've been in companies that are pretty early on that have huge potential, but it's still like missionary work. Like, you have to believe in what you're doing, and you have to be like almost missionary about the vision or the mission of the business. And sometimes the folks aren't coming with that motivation. They're coming because they want to catch the next seat on the rocket ship. They want to go be part of a big breakout company in an early stage. And I think like really understanding someone's motivations when you're hiring them is such an important part of what the hiring managers need to do, and founders and CEOs really need to focus on as they're building their early team, because you want mostly missionaries, because there's so much like thrashing and so many ups and downs in the startup journey. If you have a lot of people that are not focused and committed to the mission, you're going to get tons of attrition, and that disrupts the business in so many ways. So that's another big failure mode that I see. And then the final one, I think, is folks that don't grow with the business and they have to be replaced or augmented or layered over time. I always think that the best companies are built from within. Like, they don't go out and hire these big high price free agents that have like done it before, several companies ahead of their scale. I think the best companies are always built from within. They're promoting people from within that have proven something, but they haven't established that they're going to be a slam dunk for the next scope or stage. Just like many sports teams, like the winning sports teams, they're all built through the draft and they develop their people. So I always think like a lot of what makes a company successful are developing the talent that you have. And so I put a lot of focus on that. And that comes in all forms, how you communicate, how transparent you are so they understand what's happening. Do you give them opportunities to go take on jobs that they haven't proven that they can do well? Like, do you bet on them and do you believe in them and take chances on people? Do you support them when they need training and education and development? Do you allow them to make mistakes? Like, does the culture tolerate mistakes? All of these things go into creating an environment you could rapidly develop people. And I think that's such an important part of what makes companies ultimately succeed.
Howard, I want to take this to a different angle now. You said something quite personal, and I guess you could take it to the personal side, but it's something I really wanted to bring up in this conversation today is how leadership, especially at this level, the founder, CEO level, can impact your life outside of work. And how has your perspective on that changed over time?
I think I used to be more what I would call locally ambitious, which means that I was looking for ways that I could get myself ahead or my team ahead. I've become much more globally ambitious, meaning like I've thought more about the impact that my work and my team's work has on the broader community and the broader world that we operate in. I work in cybersecurity, and I've been in cyber a big part of my career. I started in 2000, so I've been around cyber for like 25, 26 years now. And it's such critical work for making sure that we can extract maximum value from all the great technology being developed. And you see it everywhere today. There's so many problems with our current cybersecurity capabilities. And that's part of the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now. I just started a new role like 4 months ago, and it's kind of come full circle because some of the problems I started working on 25 years ago, they haven't been solved. I'm talking about identity management and identity security in particular. And so for me, as I thought about what I want my life's work to stand for, I kind of came full circle, came back into this market that I had worked on, more than 2 decades ago, with some success, but mild success. Haven't really solved these problems, haven't been part of like a big breakout winning company in this space. And I wanted to come back and work here and kind of go tend to unfinished business. So much of what drives me now is having that kind of global ambition, like really changing the cybersecurity market for the better and leaving that imprint on the market. And so that's one thing that's really happened for me is like thinking broader and bigger about my life's work and what impact I'm having. Another big thing that's changed for me is just like the orientation towards people. I saw this great article over the weekend, and I'll have to get you the link you could put in the show notes. It charted across your lifespan, like the amount of time per day you spend on certain things, like how much time you spend with family members, how much time you spend with your kids, how much time you spend with your partner, and how much time you spend at work. We all know this to some degree. If you're in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, you know this because you've been working for a while, you understand this. But it's really, really eye-opening to see the amount of time you're spending with people at work. And so for me personally, over the last few career decisions that I've made, I've over-indexed on the people I'm working with. I mean, the company and the market opportunity is always going to be like a strong number one consideration, but the people I'm working with and choosing to work with has become a very strong like 1B. So there's 1A of the market and company, and then the 1B of the people. I think it's really like that. It's almost equivalent. Like the people are just as important to me now as the market opportunity. And earlier in my career, I think it was different. I always focused on the market opportunity. I didn't care as much about the people. I didn't care that, those were people I would enjoy being around or learn from or any of those things. I just wanted to join the best company, and I figured the rest would sort itself out. But I've seen firsthand that you have to be really intentional about picking the people that you want to work with. And that goes in so many ways, right? It's about like your shared vision and ambition. It's about values and culture. It's about how you deal with difficult things, the chemistry you have, obviously. All of those things factor into it, but I've over-indexed on people a lot more in my career in the last decade or so.
I agree. So I'm 38, and we did a survey back in 21, I think it was 2021 or 2022, where we wanted to ask engineers in our network what were the decisions that they made, how they made them about joining a company. And what we found is engineers who are, I think the number was over 32 or 33 years old, they index on people more than anything, the people they work with. And then the younger engineers in the early 20s were indexing more on the product or the market opportunity.
Yeah.
I think part of it is as you get older in life, you begin to realize that, as you said, you're spending way more time at work than anywhere else. And you are sacrificing spending time with your family, whether it's your partner or your kids. For you personally, how has that affected you earlier on in your life? Because I think that's something we don't talk about a lot in Silicon Valley is this need to constantly succeed and win, which is natural, it's normal, and we are in a very competitive market. But how those decisions and that emphasis on success and growth and grinding it out, having that grit has a knock-on effect on our personal lives.
It's the thing that I think we all struggle with, how to keep these lives in harmony or balance and integrated. There's so many different things, people are saying like, it's not about work-life balance, about work-life integration. I believe in that. And actually, I've always done that where I brought my family into work all the time, and my spouse, my wife was always around the company and everyone knew her. So I always try to integrate my lives, but running a company as the CEO of a high growth startup during COVID with all of this turmoil that I talked about earlier had a huge cost and tax on my family. And I'm paying the price for that. And it's something that we all struggle with. My only advice for the people that are watching and listening is think about the positive side of the sacrifice, because it's easy to focus on the negative part of the sacrifice. I'm missing my kids' soccer games or their recitals, or I'm missing dinners with them and all that stuff. Like that's all the negative side. That's all very visible to us, I think, for most of us that are paying those costs. But there's also a positive side of it, which is your kids get to see you pursuing something that's very important to you, and they see you dedicating yourself to it. They see you like giving it your all. That has a huge positive psychological effect on them that is sort of silent. Like you won't know that until you see your kids grow up and they've got that same level of determination and resiliency and grit that like they've observed in you. That's one thing that my parents did for me. They never talked about any of this stuff. I just saw them work. Like they owned a Chinese restaurant, a little hole in the wall Chinese restaurant near UC Berkeley. And I saw them work 364 days a year. I barely saw them. So there wasn't a lot of like vocal parenting, but it was like the subliminal parenting through their actions and seeing how they worked and persevered and got through hard times that really had a profound impact on who I became. And those have been huge keys to my success. And so I always try to encourage people, like, think about, both the costs, but also the benefits of you grinding and working and sacrificing all that family time. And then everyone's got to make their own personal decision about where they are on this cost benefit analysis, right? But for me, I want to have my kids see me working really hard and giving my all to my career. I think that'll have a very positive impact on them. It also means that like I have to ruthlessly prioritize my time. So I've stopped watching sports. I don't hang out with my friends as much as I want. I don't get to play golf as much as I want, right? Like you have to kind of like something has to give.
Of course.
And ultimately everyone has to decide what they need to protect and what they give up.
Yeah, it's what your priorities are. And I absolutely agree. I don't watch sports because of those reasons. In between work and reading and educating yourself and trying to be the best person you can, there's not enough time in the day. I'm just like you. I believe in work-life integration as opposed to work-life balance. But on that note, I want to wrap up this episode today with a book recommendation. It's something that I always do, Howard, and I like to always say how important this is to selfishly to me, but I do believe now more than ever with AI and our dependence on AI, whether it's a chat GPT or a computer, we are spending a lot of time, I guess, depending on these technologies as opposed to writing our own text or our own emails. Reading, I feel, is very important, not just for self-education, but just for our cognitive function. So I guess for you, Howard, what would you say is a book that you'd recommend?
I do read a lot, and I think the book that has probably stuck with me the most in the last year or so is 5 Types of Wealth. It talks about what success and wealth looks like in your end state, and people reimagine what that looks like. I think so many of us are over-indexed on economic wealth. The book makes the point that, there's a lot more to it. Time wealth, having abundance of time, having abundance of social connections and relationships, having abundance of health. There's so many other types of wealth that are important for all of us to live healthy, successful, happy lives. And it really kind of helps reframe what that equation looks like for all of us. And again, everyone has to decide where they are on the spectrum, but it helps you broaden your spectrum in how you think about it. So I think that's a good one for everyone.
Appreciate it. Howard, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for making the time today to spend some time with me talking about these very important topics on Inside Silicon Mind.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Inside the Silicon Mind. This podcast is powered by Harrison Clark. For more episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. As always, stay curious, stay consistent, and stay inside the Silicon Mind.